I love zombie movies. Having grown up in Pittsburgh will do that to you. And working in the Monroeville Mall will only compound that issue. But I also love British comedy. I was brought up on it. So, of course, Shaun of the Dead is like this perfect mixture of two things I really enjoy. But, I have questions. So, I figured I would go deep diving here and try to answer some of them. And how's that for a slice of fried gold? Question number 1. How does Ed foreshadow the entire plot of the film? So, one of the things that Edgar Wright has been known to do is to put a good deal of foreshadowing and little comments that point to other moments in the story. There's a moment here where Shaun's best friend, Ed, gives a rundown of the things that he wants to do to cheer his buddy up. You see, Shaun just got dumped by his girlfriend, Liz, and Ed decides that the best way to perk him up is to spend the next day drinking, and he tells him this.
We'll have a Bloody Mary first thing, or a bite of the king's head, couple of the little princess, we'll stagger back in. Back at the bar for Shaun's, how's that for a slice of fried gold?
Now, this whole spiel is essentially a coded message of what is about to happen the following day, in order. He says that we'll have a Bloody Mary first thing. Well, shortly after, the zombie invasion kicks into high gear, and the boys are oblivious to it all until they notice a girl in the garden, which is the backyard for those of us in the States. She becomes the very first zombie, since I'm saying the Z word, that they go up against. And we get to see that she's wearing a name tag, and her name, it's Mary, and she ends up quite bloody. So we've already had the Bloody Mary first thing. And by the way, if you're also curious about how she got into the garden, there's a short comic that Wright wrote called There's Something About Mary that details how she turned into a zombie and got from the supermarket to their house. Ed next says that they'll have a bite at the king's head, and this is where it begins a sort of royal analogy. After they leave their house, the first place they go to is Shaun's mom's house, and they end up trying to save her and deal with Shaun's stepdad, who he has a rough relationship with. As they're fleeing, he's bitten in the neck, or I guess you can call that the head. And as the patriarch of the family, he's acting as king, so we've had a bite at the king's head. Next, he says that they'll have a couple at the Little Princess, which means to have a couple of drinks at a pub with the name The Little Princess, but instead they go to Liz's house to get her. Now, continuing on with the whole king thing, that would make Shaun the prince and his fair lady Liz that princess. But she's not alone. She's there with her flatmates, David and Diane, or for those of us with class, Dawn and Burner Black. So, right there, they get the couple at the Little Princess, fulfilling Ed's sacred prophecy. The next thing he says is to stagger back here, meaning the Winchester, their favorite bar. This echoes them pretending to be zombies in order to blend in with them, literally staggering. He ends his plans with saying bang back at the bar for shots, which is clearly how the film ends, with them behind the bar at the winch with a shotgun doing a little bit of the bang bang. Now, clearly, this is just a fun foreshadowing bit in the script, but in universe, it's an odd coincidence. So maybe Ed has a bit of foresight. Maybe if he had ended his whole rant there with something more chill like safe at home in our beds or something, maybe that also would have come true. Question number 2. Why did the dead come back? As with any movie about the dead rising, there's always the question of why is this happening? It's one of the bigger mysteries of the Romero Dead series, and even though not as many people ask that about this film, it's still something that comes up. Well, as it is, there are several possibilities that are brought up in this film. During it, at one point, there's a news report that talks about radiation from a downed satellite called Deep Space Probe Omega 6.
Deep Space Probe Omega 6, due to return to Earth this weekend, unexpectedly re-entered Earth's atmosphere of the southeast England and broken apart over what's believed to be a volcanic area.
which is the exact same reason it is given, or I guess suggested, in the original Night of the Living Dead. But before that can be our conclusive answer, there's later a newspaper article that talks about genetically modified crops. Now, this is thought to be a callback to the film Let Sleeping Corpses Lie, also called The Living Dead at Manchester Morgue, although that film predates the fear of GMOs and it's instead crops altered by ultrasonic radiation. But that's not all, because a little later on, someone mentions rage-infected monkeys, which is a pretty clear shout out to that one about the guy who goes into a coma and misses the whole beginning of the zombie outbreak and then wakes up in the middle of it all. I think that's called The Walking Dead, right?
Claims that the virus was caused by rage-infected monkeys have now been...
It's not revealed in the movie, and in fact, in the end, after everything is resolved, the TV begins to tell the source of the outbreak, and it says that the phenomenon resulted from the use of, and then the letter D, and is then turned off.
As we now know, the phenomenon resulted from the use of highly...
The monkeys were never a serious possibility, considering that the first time that they're mentioned is after this, and they're saying that they've shown that it's not a possibility. And I have to say that the phrase, the use of, makes me think that we can rule out the satellite. If we're using the possibilities that the film has presented us, the genetically altered crops could fall into that category. But he starts to say a D word. And I'm going to go out on a limb and think he's saying dangerous, possibly. And considering that GMOs are super common and completely safe, I'm not sure that you can throw those in there as dangerous. Plus, the ending shows us guys in hazmat suits cleaning something up. So it would appear as if the actual reason was unconnected to anything that the film is throwing out at you so far, since the hazmat guys could certainly line up with radiation from that satellite, but not the phrase, the use of. So, yeah, the reason is never given, and in fact, based on the clues that they give us, none of the suggested explanations work. So the answer is something that the movie doesn't even give us. Some sort of radioactive source that was being used, likely locally, since this seems to be an English phenomenon. So perhaps nuclear marmite, because no one else anywhere in the world is actually eating that. Question number 3. Why didn't they go into the cellar earlier? At the end of the movie, you know, the whole bang back to the bar for shots part, things come to a head when they're surrounded by zombies coming in through the doors and windows, and they're hiding behind the bar with the undead all about. When they realize that they're trapped, Ed suggested they go down into the cellar. But why didn't they think to go down here earlier? They wouldn't have had to clamp down and be quiet as hard as they did, and the zombies likely would have lost interest and went away. I mean, it's clear that Ed was aware of the cellar beforehand, and this wasn't something that they had just realized in that moment was there. The Winchester was their favorite bar, and they went there all the time, so it's pretty likely that they would have been aware that it was there. And when Shaun says, "What could we do now?" and Ed says, without hesitation, "The cellar." So they knew it was there. So why wait so long? Well, this one is pretty similar to the old Night of the Living Dead argument about whether or not Harry Cooper was right and that they should have hid in the cellar the whole time. There, Ben suggested that they stay up top and only go down there as a last resort, and it's long been debated whether or not they should have listened to Cooper. Here, there's no such argument, as no one had suggested it earlier. But there's a big difference between earlier and that point. Earlier, there were 6 of them, and that cellar doesn't look too big. Having everyone crammed down there likely didn't seem like a fun idea, and they didn't think it was necessary. No one in that room knew what the zombies were capable of, and likely weren't thinking about how bad things could get. It was all rather calm until Barb returned, and then everything went mad all at once. Before that moment, the cellar likely seemed like too extreme of a measure, so they saved it as a last resort, which of course, they ended up needing. Question number 4. What happened to Diane? Diane is Liz's good friend and aspiring actress, played to perfection by Lucy Davis. And in the finale, her boyfriend David is pulled apart by the Horde and eaten. She then loses it and follows him into the crowd, seemingly swallowed up, but she's never seen or mentioned again. So, what happened to her? Well, if you're really into this film and have the DVD, there's an answer for you, but I might have something different to say about it. But first, the DVD has an extra on it that actually follows up from that scene. It says that she was able to use David's leg to fight her way through that mob and push to the other side. From there, she climbed up a tree and remained out of their reach and passed out. Later on, she woke up to see that the Winchester had burned, and she stayed in the tree for a few days and ate David's leg, and then climbed down and would later keep in touch with Shaun and Liz. But I have to tell you, I'm not a big fan of this. First off, look at her run into this horde. This is a lot of zombies, and there doesn't seem like a lot of leeway to swing a leg with any force to it. We do hear her say David a few times after, and no scream, so that does lend the possibility that for some reason she was able to escape. But if she was up in a tree, seemingly right outside the pub, how did none of the massive military squad and cleanup crew not see her? And how did all of that noise not wake her up? I feel like one of those things would have happened. But then, at the end, back at Shaun's place, he has this shelf up, and there's a picture here of his mom, and a man that people seem to say is Philip, but I'll confess that from what I can see of the picture, I don't think that looks like him, and could possibly just be Shaun's actual dad. But those are clearly pictures of people that Shaun lost, since if it's either his dad or Philip, it's still someone that's gone. And then, right next to them, is a picture of Diane. It seems weird that they would have a picture of a living friend on a tribute shelf to people that are deceased. So yeah, in my opinion, based on what I see in the movie, Diane is gone. Although clearly Edgar Wright disagrees, so I guess this one is up to you guys. But one other thing that I'll point out in this scene right here, we know Shaun used to DJ, but gave it up. And earlier in the film, there's a poster for this, an old gig, and he went by the name General Sebeg. Well, in that later scene, there's now a new poster, not seen earlier, and the date of the event is in 2004, implying that after the events of the film, Shaun has gone back to spinning that vinyl. Well, except for the dire straits. Question number 5. Who calls Ed? At a pretty crucial moment in the film, the crew are trying to get into the Winchester as the zombies are approaching. As they're attempting to get in, Ed gets a phone call and he takes it, having a rather casual conversation. Ed calls him Noodle, and it sounds as if he's asking him for weed. So, who is this person that calls a weed man in the middle of a zombie apocalypse, all chill? Who is Noodle? Well, based on a couple of clues in the film, it appears as if the person is actually Noel, one of Shaun's more annoying co-workers at good old 4E Electric. In one of his first scenes, Ed gets a call from Noodle and says that he doesn't have any drugs and only has a Henry himself. A Henry is slang for an eighth. You know, like, I am Henry VIII, I am. Henry VIII, I am. I am Henry, Henry. When we first meet Noel, he gets a phone call and tells the person on the other line, I spoke to him and he's only got a Henry. Throw in the fact that Noodle sounds like a pretty easy nickname for Noel, and he's the easy answer. Also, the voice on the other end of the line when he calls near the end sounds pretty similar, so yeah, that's him. Plus, he's calling Ed and seems to be operating as if things are business as usual, so it's somewhat possible that he's been hanging out all day, completely oblivious to the fact that there's even a zombie apocalypse going on, which is why he likely sounds so chill. Oh, and also why he ends up zombified himself, turned into an undead worker in the end. Question number 6. Why isn't it Shaun of the Dead? So clearly the movie is taking advantage of the name Shaun, making a joke that compares it to the Romero classic Dawn of the Dead. Given that, doesn't it make more sense to spell it that way? Like, make it SHAWN of the Dead. Why make it SHAUN? And it's not even like, well, that's the more common and accepted spelling. I looked it up. The most common was to spell Shaun as SEAN. The second most popular was freaking SHAWN. And the third was SHAUN. And according to the Baby Name Uniqueness Analyzer, it's not even close. EAN was the 363rd most popular boy's name. HAUN was the 508th most popular, but HUAN 1,200 and goddamn 75. So making it spelled that way seems to be geared to just making my eye twitch. But this one does have an official answer, although not a satisfying one. Simon Pegg is quoted as saying, in a making of book called You've Got Red on You, that they didn't know how to go with the spelling. He says they didn't want SEAN because people might think it was Scene of the Dead, which is maddening because who does that? Who doesn't know the difference between Shaun and Scene? Is that a thing? But even if they did call it that, it still begs the same question. Why not SHAWN? In the same book, Pegg gives the answer and says that putting the W in it would make it more of a play on Dawn, but they didn't want it to be too obvious and chose the more obscure spelling to personally drive me insane, or I guess to be a little bit more unique. But, like, call it Shaun of the Dead. Put the W in there. I mean, I understand Juan of the Dead because there's no way to spell that with a W. So, I don't know. Is it just me? Does this drive anyone else crazy? Question number 7. What would Shaun feed zombie Ed? So at the ending of the movie, Ed has been turned into a zombie. Shaun, against all better judgment, has decided to keep him as a buddy, hides him in his shed to play video games with. But like, what would he even give him to eat? And you know, while I'm at it, how did he get there? Well, that part is answered on the same DVD extra stuff that I talked about earlier, and it said that after Shaun and Liz went up in the lift, Ed used the shotgun to shoot some of the zombies coming down, and he used a body to barricade himself behind the steps. The military then came in and cleared the bar, but didn't discover his unconscious body there. After a week or so, Shaun came to the bar and found him there at night, and lured Ed back to his shed using himself as bait. Once there, he chained him up and kept him, and as we see in the film, he's teaching him to play games. On the DVD, Ed says that he no longer has the urge to eat Shaun, insinuating that after a while, the undead lose their taste for eating humans, or at least ones they're comfortable with. But it doesn't answer what he does exactly eat. Well, based on that TV program, quite a few zombies are just out there, being used for various purposes, so they clearly have methods for keeping them fed. Sure, most of them look like they're being used for business purposes and not for private residences, but you've got to figure that those companies would have some access to food sources to give them. Hell, on the game show, they're luring them with big old buckets of raw meat, and I'm guessing that it would not be acceptable to have those be human beings, so the zombies probably also like animal meat. There's even that point earlier on where one of them is going to eat a pigeon, so it clearly doesn't have to be people. So, Shaun is probably either getting food from wherever they're feeding the worker bees, or also maybe just finding random animals to give him in a pinch. And you know, if all else fails, I'm sure there's one food that even the curse of death won't stave the hunger of.
Cornetto.
Question number 8. Here's the important one. Can dogs look up? One of the more famous parts of the film is Ed's assertion that dogs can't look up, and Shaun arguing with him about it, insisting that dogs can, in fact, look up. But like, can they? Well, first things first, I guess we can test it, but I don't have a dog, so I guess we'll find out if cats can look up. Hey, can you look up? Can you look up? Look up. Hey, can you look up? They can't. But where does this even come from? The origin of the joke stemmed from when Simon Pegg and Nick Frost were working on the TV show Spaced together. There was a dog featured in a scene, and they needed it to look up, and it absolutely would not do so, causing Frost to openly wonder if it was simply an impossibility. And this scene stemmed from that. But can they, really? But yeah, dogs can look up. I mean, most of them are just a foot or two off the ground. Of course they look up. Everything is up to a freaking dog. But the truth of this whole thing is that they don't look up in the same way that human beings do. Mainly, it's because a dog is on all fours, and their spine is usually parallel to the ground, whereas a human being's is perpendicular. So when we look straight up, our neck turns towards a near 90-degree angle to our spine. A dog's neck is already at an angle to its spine, so positioning it so that it looks straight up requires a much sharper angle, one that's not possible, so it can't look directly up. Apparently, their eyes have a slightly more limited range of motion as well, which sort of compounds all of that. So the actual answer is that dogs definitely can look up, but not to the degree that we can. Question number 9. Hey, is that one zombie Chris Martin? There's a couple of little cameos from people playing zombies in the movie, and one of them is Edgar Wright himself, who shows up near the ending of the film as one of the undead, falling down. The other cameo is only familiar if you're a fan of Spaced, the show that this movie is sort of spun out of, and we'll talk about that one shortly. But according to a number of sources on the internet, another famous zombie is none other than Chris Martin, frontman of Coldplay. He's in the film playing himself a little later on, prepping to do a performance for Zombaid, a charity for survivors of the outbreak, but it's said that he was also on set one day and got into zombie makeup and was one of the horde in the finale. And this is a totally true fact. I mean, it was even in the trivia section on IMDb, and 17 other articles that I found that all said, here's one fact that you didn't know about Shaun of the Dead. Chris Martin plays a zombie. But the only thing is, he didn't. Simon Pegg has declared that he's not in the film as a zombie at all, and thinks that the confusion comes from his non-makeup cameo near the end. Apparently, this rumor became so pervasive that even Martin himself thought that he did it, and said that he recalled being a zombie, and had to be reminded that he simply played Chris Martin, a guy who will pretty much do anything, including some silly stint on a sitcom called When the Whistle Blows, where his inclusion made no sense at all and was clearly just stunt casting, so someone was clearly having a laugh. Oh, and this guy also isn't Colin Mockery, so he doesn't get any points, but they're all made up anyway. Question number 10. What happened to the Winchester? This will likely be another quick one, but a very large portion of the film involves the Winchester, Shaun's favorite bar, and partially the reason that Liz broke up with him, since she got tired of always going there. Of course, the ending of the movie takes place there, and after the zombies all get in, they set the bar on fire in order to keep them away. As the military arrives, the fire is raging pretty strong, and it would seem that that would be the end of the old pub. But then, in that final scene, as Liz is telling Shaun about what she wants to do, one of the things she mentions is to head down to the Phoenix for a roast. And in Greek mythology, the Phoenix was a bird that symbolizes immortality and renewal, and its whole gig is to be reborn from its own ashes. Like, you set the bird on fire, and it's able to regenerate and be born again. So, it would seem that the Winchester survives on, but is actually reborn. Likely it wasn't completely burned down, but the damage looked like it would be pretty extensive, and we know that the previous owners are now dead, considering we saw their corpses. But it looks like someone bought it, and over those couple of months, revamped it. So the fire damage likely wasn't as bad as it seemed, and the new owners decided to embrace its nature and give it the new name of the Phoenix. Or I guess it could have just burned down and the Phoenix is a completely different bar, but that's way less fun. Question number 11. What's the connection to Spaced? If you're not familiar, Shaun of the Dead was a spin-off of sorts of a British TV show that was called Spaced. It was also from Edgar Wright and had Simon Pegg and Nick Frost playing a pair of friends, albeit ones that are as dysfunctional as they are here. Peggy's character of Tim is somewhat similar to Shaun, but Frost's Mike is pretty different in that he's more straight-laced and a military wannabe, but he's just as thick-headed. There's an episode of the show where Tim becomes obsessed with playing Resident Evil and starts seeing zombies everywhere, hallucinating a full-on invasion, and it would become the inspiration for them doing a full-length tribute to the zombie genre. But having Wright at the helm and Rost and Pegg in the leads wasn't the only connection. First of all, the other main character of the show is Daisy, played by Jessica Hines, and she's here as well, playing Yvonne. Peter Serafinowicz also appears in both since he's the boys' flatmate Pete, but was on the show as the devious Dwayne Benzie. Beyond that, a number of other actors who would show up on Spaced in smaller roles also appear here, like Mark Gatiss, Paul Kaye, David Walliams, and Lucy Ackhurst. But there's more links as well. For one, Pete answers the phone saying,
Dom, hi. Come on, it was pretty.
Which is the exact same way that he answers the phone constantly in the TV show.
Hi, Dom, yeah.
Although he's definitely not meant to be the same character. The joke with,
He's not my boyfriend.
Might be a bit warm, the cooler's off. Thanks, babe.
is repeated almost word for word from the show.
He's not my boyfriend. Hi, babe.
But then there's the biggest one, the character of Tyres, a regular on Spaced, and played by the great Michael Smiley, shows up here wearing his character's trademark outfit. And he's a zombie now, so there's a possibility that these two things are meant to be set in the same universe. And Tyres was not, in fact, one of the OU lucky people. Number 12. How is the Cornetto Trilogy connected? As you likely know, this is the first part of what is referred to as the Cornetto Trilogy, or I suppose the Three Flavors Cornetto Trilogy, or alternately, the Blood and Ice Cream Trilogy. That whole Three Flavors thing is a reference to the Three Colors Trilogy, as those are three movies that are not connected and just feature similar themes, and that's what's going on here. The trilogy consists of Shaun of the Dead, a zombie film, Hot Fuzz, a buddy cop comedy, and The World's End, an alien invasion film. All of these involve some form of violence and struggling with personal maturity, and of course,
Cornetto.
Now, for those of us in the US, Cornettos are very similar to Nutty Buddies. Each of the film involves the little cone treat, and each one has a different flavor. In Shaun, when our character is headed to the store, he asks Ed if he wants him to get anything, and he responds,
Cornetto.
He grabs him one, and it's strawberry flavored. In Hot Fuzz, police officers Nicholas Angel and his sidekick Danny go in the convenience store and buy themselves a cone, and we see the wrapper on the counter, and this one gives us the Classico flavor. Finally, in The World's End, we don't actually get to see anyone buying or enjoying the ice cream, and instead, in the finale, we see a Cornetto wrapper fly up and stick to a fence, and it's the mint flavor. So, a number of actors would appear in all three films, beyond Pegg and Frost, including Julia Deakin, who was also in Spaced, and Martin Freeman from The Office, and Bill Nighy from just being awesome. Now, there's really no theories to suggest that these films take place in the same universe, and I don't even think that works from a fan theory aspect. They're three separate universes depicting similar characters going through similar circumstances in terms of facing some sort of crisis that forces them to accept some sort of responsibility for their lives and to come to some sort of terms with it. Oddly enough, it's been said that the whole thing came from free ice cream. Apparently, they used the Cornetto in the first film because Wright had often used one as a hangover cure and incorporated it into the story. When it became a laugh moment, Cornetto sent a bunch of free ice cream to the cast and crew for their after party. When making Hot Fuzz, Wright included it again with the hopes of getting more free ice cream, but alas, they didn't send any. I guess there were no hard feelings though, since the theme was then continued into the third film. It's also been theorized that the flavors are representing the films themselves. Shaun uses strawberry, reddish in tone for it being a horror film, and also You've Got Red on You. Hot Fuzz used Classico, and the wrapper is blue, representing police officers and the boys in blue. Finally, World's End uses mint, and the wrapper is green, with that being a color that is often associated with science fiction and alien invasions with little green men. You know what? I'll be back. I need to go get some ice cream now. So there you have it, a dozen questions about Shaun of the Dead. A little bit more than normal, so a couple bonus questions there for you. But yeah, I love this movie. It's one of my favorite comedies. I know that some people don't like it as much as I do, but I happen to very, very much enjoy it. Let me know if you liked these questions. Let me know if you have other questions about it. Let me know if you have other questions about the trilogy. Tell me that down below in the comments. I want to hear that. If you have other answers to the questions I posed, put those down there below as well. Also, if you liked the video, hit the like button. If you like the channel, hit the subscribe button. And if you want to, go to my Patreon page at patreon.com/movietimelines and help support this channel. And I'll see you very shortly for yet another great video. Thanks a lot, guys, and bye-bye.